bachelor's degree in public relations and is a member of the Society of Human Resource Management. Lisa also has a certification as a senior professional in human resources and has completed her certification in human resource related law from Susan College. Lisa is president of American Senior Living, a human resource outsourcing company specializing in providing services and education for life. Thank you very much.
It's my pleasure to be here this afternoon. Can everyone hear me in the back okay? And as we're going through today, please feel free to jump in with questions, input, how ideas of how maybe you handle some of these things at your community, and so we can all be real interactive with each other. That would be great. So what I'm going to talk about today is some strategies to attract, hire, motivate, and retain top talent. We all know how important that is. I'm going to go through a couple of the reasons why, but I think we all know that. And we all know that it's a challenge and it's going to continue to be a growing challenge. I wanted to start out with just a little quote on to win in the marketplace, you must first win in the workplace. Your marketplace, your residents, in order for you to serve your residents and provide them the best care and the best home for them to live in, you've got to have great employees taking care of them. It really starts with your employees. So that's what we're going to focus on. Learning objectives. These are the 3 learning objectives for today's session. Talk about tools for attracting and hiring top talent and the right fit in your organization. How you retain your talented employees, decrease that cost of turnover, and increase employee productivity, resulting in increased resident satisfaction. So at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. I'll try to step back so you can see a little better here. Okay, so how important is it? Obviously, we all know it's critical, but let's put some dollars on it. Let's kind of look at it from that standpoint. Are a lot of people in this room in HR? A lot of HR, any CFOs? Oh, I saw a CFO tag there. CFOs always like the numbers. Okay, so first let's talk about productivity. This is a study that was done many years ago and validated that says that they looked at all levels of positions, so all the way from housekeepers to your directors of dining service, and this isn't senior living specific, this is across all industries, and found that the majority of employees are average producers, about 68%. Then we have about 16% that fall in that non-producer category, and then about 16% that we consider superior performers and producers. Do you all agree that seems pretty relevant, pretty similar? So what does that mean? And I just took a little bit out of the study. There's a lot more to it, but so they put a dollar figure on it, and a superior worker in an unskilled, semi-skilled position. So let's say maybe your housekeeper position. A superior worker's output is 19% more than an average worker. If you're going to take the superior to the below average, double that. So it's even higher. Skilled, so maybe your CNAs, some of your positions that will require more skill to perform, that output is 32% more between your superior workers and average. And then your management professional, the gap gets even bigger, 48. So when you put that into a dollar figure, and we just took an unskilled worker averaging an average of $20,000 per year, the cost of production lost to an average of one person is $3,800. So those are big numbers. So when you're thinking about when you're hiring and making decisions between two candidates, or maybe you're hiring very quickly and not finding the right fit for that position, there's dollars associated with those hiring errors and retaining the wrong people. What about turnover? We know turnover is costly. There's a lot of hard dollars we can put on turnover. Obviously, there's advertising, background checks, all the drug testing, things like that. can be costly. You may have to bring in temp staff. Additional staff has to work overtime. Time lost from HR, from your managers on the recruiting and training those people. The work quality, performance, and absenteeism that oftentimes goes along with turnover, negative morale. Your resident disruption. They want the same person serving them every day. They want the same person greeting them when they walk into the community every day. And so that resident disruption, while it's hard to attach a hard dollar to it, that's a real cost that's out there. And about 80% of turnover is due to hiring mistakes. So again, an estimate, an $8 an hour salary.
The reputation of the community.
The reputation, thank you, that's very huge. If you had residents looking at, or potential residents or family members looking at your community when they call in, if your concierge doesn't give a good first impression, then could that impact that decision? The way the way the community looks, feels, all of those things are really important to your residents, but they're also important to get the right employees. Are you an employer of choice? Community reputation. Thank you. With Tina? Thank you, Tina. What is your culture like? Is your culture one of hospitality, mission-driven? What's your leadership like? Very important. And are any of you have communities in smaller towns, small towns, where even in the larger cities, this is a small industry, and things get around really quickly as far as community reputation and leadership. Work-life balance is important to all of us. Important to recognize your employees. Are there professional and personal growth opportunities? And that doesn't necessarily mean that you've got to find promotion opportunities for everybody. A lot of times you have employees that are great employees in their current role, and they want to stay in that current role. They want to be a housekeeper for their career. They want to be a server for their career. It's how do we help them develop in that role? Internal cultivation. That's how I like to refer to that. Is their work meaningful? Are they tied back to the mission? We're going to talk a lot more about that. And of course, I'm not by any means saying compensation and benefits are not important. We know they are. Everyone wants to be paid fairly. But when you are providing a culture that people want to be engaged in, that they get behind your mission, that they love your residents, love the people they work with, they're much less likely to leave for a quarter more an hour down the street. And if they do, then they're probably not the right fit. How do you know if you're an employer of choice? Ask your employees. Ask your employees that work for you. Ask your employees that are leaving, why they're leaving. That's the best way to find out what's going on. Do you all do employee surveys? A lot of yeses. Certainly that's a great way to do it, but another way is just to sit down. We have a lot of people in our organization that are payroll specialists, and that's a position for us that is kind of challenging because it is one of those positions that it's not necessarily entry level, but it's usually the kind of people we're looking for. They want to be promoted right away, and it takes a while before we have additional opportunities for them. And so we are continually trying to make sure those people are engaged in their current roles, and we talk to them. Senior managers will meet with all the payroll specialists on a periodic basis and ask them about their working conditions and what can we do to help you grow your position and things like that. Coffee with the boss is a great thing. You have your executive director have coffees with and schedule a routine of different employees each month. Excuse me, I'm just getting over a cold. It never gets sick. But, post and pray, no longer an option. Some of you have been in HR for a while may have heard that expression where you would just post an ad and watch the applications or resumes come in, and that's not so much the case anymore. In fact, even if we do post an ad and you get inundated with resumes, sometimes that's actually worse because you've got a ton of resumes to go through, and they're not the quality you're looking for. Recruiting is really an everywhere, all the time situation. It's everybody's responsibility, it's not just HR. It's your leader's responsibility, they know who's going to fit on their team. Some sourcing options, and this certainly depends on what kind of positions you're looking for, but for some of your manager roles, LinkedIn is a great source that we use a lot. We've seen a lot of our communities build relationships with colleges and high schools for some of their CNA, nursing programs, servers at high schools. Conferences. Where you're at today, if you're looking for, depending on what roles you may be looking for, you are exposed to people in your industry today, and are there people that you should be working with that may be good fits for your community. Building a bulkhead of those higher turnover positions, as I mentioned, that payroll specialist position for us has been challenging, so we build a bulkhead, and again, going back to the budget, that can be easier said than done if you're fully staffed and you've actually went over, but I can tell you that we've never went over budget, because the transition is so much smoother for our clients and for the people we serve. When we do have an opening, we already have somebody we can plug in that's trained, and so certain positions that you have that may turn over a lot, having people at least in mind that you can source and contact is really important. So from a sourcing standpoint, do any of you have any ideas or things that you do at your community that work really well? Staff referrals is a great resource. And your staff are going to refer people if your staff feel that working for your community is a great place to work. So let's talk a little bit about hiring. So, any of you ever had a dining room manager come to you and say, I just had 3 people quit, I need you to hire, 3 people and they need to start tonight? So that probably happens a lot, and I get that. And we work with a lot of clients, like I said, in senior living, and they deal a lot with that. I also used to work in retail and had a lot of those same situations where you're standing in front of, you have to have somebody out there serving the customer, but you don't want to make a warm body hiring decision. When you have managers that have that philosophy, what I've tried to do is coach them into how they got in that situation, because it's just a death spiral. You can continue to hire at that pace and not do your due diligence up front, but you're going to continue to have turnover, and you're going to continue to have resident disruption, and it's going to take more of your manager's time on the back end rather than on the front end to take a little bit more time to find that right person. So I'm a big believer of behavioral-based interviewing. Do any of you use that today? A lot of head shaking, that's great. And multi or team interviews. And what I mean by that is not just having one person making that hiring decision, because sometimes we see different things and it's great to collaborate. We might find inconsistencies when we have more than one person interviewing. So basically, behavioral-based interviewing is checking the past, reviewing the present to predict future performance. Most people that fell in a position, it's not because they didn't have the technical skills. It's not because they didn't have the skills to be a CNA. It's because they weren't a fit for the organization. And doing some behavioral interviewing questions helps pull some of that out, because we're asking for specific examples, and it's a lot harder to say, yes, I'm a great team player, versus give me an example of a time that you worked on a team and somebody wasn't carrying your weight. How did you handle that? So concepts behind behavioral interviewing really bring you focus back to your mission. Provides a thorough look at the applicant. Past behavior, again, is the best predictor of future behavior. Gives the applicant a thorough view of the organization. You've got to be very upfront with the candidates as well, and let them know what the job is. We don't want to paint a picture for them that's not real. It creates more of a team atmosphere because you're already building some of that rapport. Provides foundation for hospitality-based culture. I think the majority of senior living communities, if not already, are believing in that hospitality versus healthcare mentality. So what is a behavioral question? It's one that requires an answer based on the life situation, so it's not a yes/no. That demonstrates or reflects an attribute. I'm going to talk a little bit about attributes here in a moment. Complexity of questions are determined by candidates' experience level, and life experience can be substituted. So I'm sure we all interview people that this might be their first job. If you're hiring dining servers that are high school students, this may be their first job. So if you say, give me an example of a time where you completed a project at work, and they're not going to have one. So you can relate that back to school, maybe some kind of school activity they're involved in, but so it doesn't necessarily have to be work specific. So attributes, sometimes we call it competencies, sometimes behaviors, but basically, before you start a behavioral interviewing process, you want to go through your positions and identify what those attributes are for each position. And your managers need to be involved in this process. But you're going to have certain attributes, let's say, that everyone in the organization has to have. Everybody that you hire has to be customer focused. That's a core competency for everybody. But the director of dining that you hire may need to have decision-making competencies or business acumen competencies that a dining server would not. So you identify them by position, what those competencies are, and then create questions by them and take them in with you and ask those questions right off the list. And that way you're asking everybody similar questions and you're really digging down to those competencies or attributes. This will help you identify if this is going to be the right person, the right fit for that position. An example of a behavioral-based question, maybe you might ask for a entry-level role. Everyone just had lunch, everyone's tired.
Tell me about a time that you worked with someone that you had conflict. How did you?
Great question. I don't know if everyone heard that, but tell me about a time that you encountered conflict while working with someone and how did you handle that? It's a great question to determine how they're going to work with others. Before is asking for when I was in retail, I always say, like, give me an example of a time when you were assisting a customer that was very happy about something that wasn't your mistake, and how did you handle that? And you learn a lot about how they react in those situations, how they react under pressure. A good question for trustworthiness is, we all make mistakes. Give me an example of a time where you made a mistake and how you corrected it and what the outcome was. So questions to really dig in deeper. So some good interview steps, and it's going to be different at everybody's community and culture, but in a perfect world, I think HR does some pre-screening, reviews the application, make sure it's complete, looks for those red flags, gaps in employment, those type of things. Have they been convicted of a felony, those kind of questions, and probably a pre-screen phone screen. First interview with the hiring manager, so whoever that person's going to report to, and then a second interview, whether that be with another manager. You may have a team interview, but partner your directors together and give them expectations on having multiple interviews. I know some executive directors that like to interview every single person. Now, whether or not that's realistic in your community or not, and whether or not that's a great use of their time, I'm not sure, because the director should be able to take on those roles and not only be involved that help make those decisions. There are job match assessments out there. Certainly there's a cost associated with those, but again, add that cost back of the turnover and productivity. Certainly for manager level positions and above, I really recommend some kind of job match profile, whether it be Profiles International, DIS. There's a host of them available. But those really can help identify people that are going to fit into your culture. And of course, reference and background checking. References can be challenging. It's kind of funny in HR because we all, if someone calls us, we don't really like to give out the information, but then when we call someone else, we're trying to get it out. But a lot of times you can tell just by the tone of someone's voice, and the body language there. So, and they're still important to show that you do things so important. I'll touch on these a little bit, but clarify expectations up front. Show them the job description. Make sure that they are aware of what is required of the job. Otherwise, you could end up with someone who accepts the position and finds out that this really wasn't for them. Refuse to compromise. I know it's easier said than done, but a lot of times we make decisions based on the fire that's standing in front of us versus long term. If engaged as managers or leaders of your community as you can be in the recruiting process. Value potential over experience. I always say you can't teach someone to be friendly. I could teach somebody to be a server, but I can't teach them to be friendly. So if I'm hiring a server, that's more important to me than someone who worked at a restaurant for years. Modify the job to fit the right person, not the person to fit the job, if you can. But if you're going to try and modify that person to fit the job, it's probably not going to work. And take full responsibility. We all make mistakes. So when you recognize that maybe you do make a hiring decision, take responsibility for it and take action. I'm not saying just to fire everybody either. That's another HR session. But make sure that it doesn't linger on. Any questions about hiring? Okay. Did any of you use the team interviews or multiple interviews? Head shaking. All right, so now we've hired them. We've got to keep them motivated. We want to retain them because that turnover is disruptive to the community. So again, why do your residents stay? Residents move in. Why do they stay at your community? Think about what. Yes, they're satisfied. They like it. They like the environment. They like the people. I think they just look like they're having too much fun. So why do employees leave? Job or workplace wasn't what they expected. Mismatch between the employee and the job. They're not getting enough feedback from their manager. They're not being provided the right tools. They feel unrecognized. According to a Gallup poll of 1 million employees, people leave managers, not companies. So in the end, turnover is mostly a management issue. It's hard to not take that personally if you've had employees leave that work for you, and we all have. And sometimes it's not a fit, but usually it's something tied back to the person that they have the most interaction with. Why do they stay? Exciting work, challenge, career growth, learning opportunity. I think in a senior living community, especially with some of your entry-level positions, working with great people is really key. They get very passionate about the residents and the people they're serving and the other employees. Fair pay, again, we know that's important. And supportive management. Does your manager walk around and greet everybody once a day? We have an office that is kind of bifurcated as far as where our CEO sits and a lot of the other employees. And in hindsight, we don't know why we had to build it that way, but it's the way it's built. So he consciously gets up and walks around at least a couple times a day to make sure he says hello to everybody. It takes him 10 seconds twice a day. So the big question, are your employees tied back to your mission, kitchen safety? So they put that much emphasis and focus on their organization, culture, and mission to tie it back to all levels of employees. And if you've ever stayed at a Ritz-Carlton, which I only get to do if I'm at a conference, and that's the only place you can stay, but it certainly is just that, all of extra touches in the service that you experience. In the orientation, so that comes first, and then it's the position information, then it's your policies and procedures. Consider assigning a mentor. Any of you have a mentor program or a buddy program at your communities? A lot of our communities do this where they have chosen, let's say, CNAs. They've chosen 2 or 3 CNAs that are in that superior performers and identified them as a mentor for new employees when a new CNA starts. And they reward them, whether it be financially or free lunch or something like that, but there's some kind of reward for the mentor. And then that mentor has some responsibilities to really be that person's buddy for the first 30, 60, 90 days. It gives that new employee somebody other than their manager who they can really trust, eat lunch with, have someone to show them around. And it can really work very well. And it's a great opportunity for the person you select as a mentor too. It's really an honor for them and says a lot about them. So I'm a big believer in those type of programs. Do stay interviews. We talk a lot about exit interviews, and that's on the back end, and then it's too late. So, and this can either be you, HR, this can be the manager, but touching base with the new employees on a periodic basis to find out, how are you doing? What areas do you maybe need more training in? Is the job what you expected? And try and get a feel for it up front. So let's talk a little bit more about motivation. I'm sure we all come to work looking like that all day, all excited. Check the time here. So what motivates employees? Development Dimensions International, DDI, which any of you are familiar with them. They do a lot of training programs, studies, research, and things like that. And they've identified 3 areas that keep employees motivated. Focused work, interpersonal support, and individual value. And they've also identified that these 3 areas are areas that most leaders, actually all leaders, have influence over. Many times control over. So we as leaders can control many of these factors, and we certainly have influence over how our employees are focused, what kind of support they're getting, and if they feel valued. So the first one is focused work, and that is, again, tying back, bless you, making sure your employees have clear direction, that they understand what's expected of them, that they're held accountable, that they get feedback, that they're given the necessary tools to be efficient. This is, again, tying back to the mission. So how do we tie a housekeeper back to the mission? How might we do that?
Just gets back to customer service.
Absolutely. And letting them know what those customer service expectations are. Why are they cleaning that apartment? What is the purpose of that? Is it to make sure the apartment's clean, or is it to provide a positive experience for the resident that has chose to retire and spend their final years there? It's really tying it back at every level. Excuse me. Timely about those resolutions. Again, looking at, I've had managers before say, well, this person isn't working really well with the rest of the team, but if I make a change there, then this is such a hard position to fill, and but you got to think of the soft costs that are associated with that. And residents know when they have team members that don't work well together. Residents can pick that out. The motivation, individual value. Are you making your employees feel valued? Do they get to make their own unique contribution? Do you let them come up with ideas? Do you give them any authority to make decisions? Certainly there's, obviously some things they can and can't do, but do you allow them to have some of that discretion? Going back to that internal cultivation, helping them grow in their current role, in their current position. Maybe measure and analyze what's going on in your community from a employee standpoint. I know some of you said you do employee surveys. What I'm talking about, like looking at your turnover analysis done quarterly, monthly, looking at why people are leaving. When you do your turnover, look at, what are those trends? Look at people that left maybe within the first 90 days. If you find that there's a higher than, that's when the majority of people are leaving, then it's probably either a hiring or orientation training issue. If it's longer term employees, then has there been something that's changed in your culture? Is it, just employees leaving for another opportunity? Is it, are there, maybe you have a new community, new competitor in town that opened and you've lost some employees to that, but helping identify those trends will help you put solutions in place to prevent them from occurring again. Length of employment. Again, the employees that are there a shorter period of time, if that's your position that's turning, it probably is something in your hiring and recruiting process. Again, surveying your existing employees, exit interviews. An exit interview, when somebody leaves, doing it in person. We have some clients that have tried to do them by mail, and you just really don't ever get anything back when you do that, unless somebody really wants to tell you something. Then they will. But exit interviews should just be a standard for all employees exiting your organization. And then hold your managers accountable. What we do with our clients on turnover is we provide them a quarterly, what we call dashboard report that shows them their turnover and all these broken down by positions and length of employment. And then the managers of those communities are measured on that. So they're measured. Now we know dining is going to have a higher turnover than administration, but they're measured on different factors related to that, such as if they have turnover one quarter in dining that's 50%, the next it's 100, then we have a bigger variance and something's going on. So I know a lot of you are probably sitting here thinking I have my head in the clouds and a lot of this isn't feasible. So I'm going to tell a little story about a community that we work with in Olathe, Kansas, nonprofit, very mission-based, sponsored by a faith-based, not a whole lot of access to money and financial backing other than to serve their residents. So it's not the Ritz, although it looks like a lot like it. But so a few years ago, this was their challenge. Talented staff they weren't retaining talented staff. They were hiring quickly, lack of training, leadership was very poor. They surveyed their residents, and most of the residents said, yeah, the community's good, it's acceptable. Minimum resident referrals. I didn't put it up here, but their occupancy was low. Sponsor came in, their faith-based sponsor said, what is going on? We have to make a change. And at that time, they brought in a new executive director who was very focused on hospitality. And we started working with them at that time, and we sat down with them, and this is what we came up with, that we've got to focus on the culture and the mission. We've got to make these employees, tie them back so they know that what they're doing is meaningful work. We've got to take the time, and there was a lot of resistance up front on behavioral interviewing. There was resistance for the managers to come to the training for behavioral interviewing because they didn't have time, a couple hours out of their day, to go through the training. But we did it, and once they started seeing results, they implemented team interviews, and then an extensive training program for their managers. We started with quarterly at first, but just leadership and hospitality to help their managers grow professionally, that trickles down to them, to their employees. And employee training, hospitality training, basis for their new hire orientation, and then it was done on an ongoing basis. We used a program called Everything Communicates, where that really focuses on how everything in your community communicates a message to the resident, to the resident's family member, to the visitors, from the way that the flowers slip when they walk in the door, from if there's garbage laying out in the foyer when you walk in, all those type of things communicate a message. Taped up signs, that was one big part of Everything Communicates training that, a lot of times we'll, see a sign taped up saying, don't use this door out of order, and which makes sense, but when you step back and look at it, that really looks kind of tacky and unprofessional. So there's probably a better way to present that. So this took about 2 years, and these were the results of the first employee survey that was done. And their employee surveys are done by an outside company, completely validated and compared to others similar in the industry. So it wasn't a survey monkey or something where employees maybe weren't as honest as they may be because they're concerned about whether or not they can be identified. So 94% of their employees said they know what's expected of them. 95% said they understand the community's mission. 94% understood the hospitality. 91% had respect for their supervisor. 92% felt their workload was manageable. And we didn't reduce their workload. We brought in more superior performers. And 90%, this is again, all the levels of position felt like they had the authority to do their work. 20% reduction in employee turnover. Residents, same company did the resident survey. The resident satisfaction was at 86%, it was up from 12%. Overall employee satisfaction was up 17%. Any marketing people in here? They'll love this, okay? Resident referrals now account for 35% of all leads, and their census raised to 98%. And then for the CFOs, their net operating margin improved 65% with a 12% improvement in operating revenues and only a 3% increase in operating expenses, which is important. That means they didn't hire a bunch more people and add on expenses to get there. And today they're actually full and have a waiting list. So it's a great success story. And I believe I was supposed to leave 10 minutes for questions, and it's pretty close, so. Excuse me. Yes.
So would you say that those results are pretty typical, or is that an outstanding result?
Well, that took a lot of commitment. And it took making sure that there were the right people in all the right positions, starting with leadership. So if you do that, then the other things can fall into place. Certainly this community had access to, again, they brought in a new executive director that had worked at some high-end hospitality and brought a lot of that with them. But certainly all the communities that we work with, and we work with a lot, when we started doing more training and taking more time doing the behavioral interviewing, we have seen results, especially in the turnover.
So how do you change the culture for people who have been there and now have new leadership? But I mean, the new leadership's been in place for a while now.
Yeah.
So I mean, do you just eliminate all of those people that don't understand your culture and mission?
Well, I think you give them the opportunity to fit in with your new culture. It's